Katerina Yaka watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Yaka saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review. This is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is Rainer Shea. We have a special guest coming on, Gabriel Rockhill. He'll be with us not too long from now, but in the meantime, we're going to jump right in with an article by Rainer Shea, which is very timely. Not unifying behind socialist states helps imperialism, July 13th, 2021. Rainer Shea, take it away.
Michael Parenti has this striking essay. I think it was written in 2003. It's an essay about all these differing political ideologies within the United States and how they seem to pretty much all share the one trait of being anti-communist. Even a lot of the supposed communists are effectively anti-communist, he seems to imply, because these people like the Trotskyists and a lot of the anarchists, anarcho-syndicalists, libertarian socialists, other sectarian leftist groups, they are kind of fixated, he says, on tearing down what they call Stalinism, on tearing down what they call authoritarian socialism. And he said that during the 1999 bombing of Yugoslavia, this bombing campaign to break up Yugoslavia, to destroy the last bastion of socialism within Europe, balkanize Yugoslavia into a neoliberal, exploitable series of countries. During this this despicable campaign, he says, a gaggle of those Trotskyists and anarchists that he mentioned earlier were effectively supporting this imperialist intervention just for the sake of scoring a point against Stalinism. So reprehensible, so counter-revolutionary, so nonsensical. And now, during the recent color revolution attempts within Cuba and Vietnam, where the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, CIA, all these shady groups are conspiring to try to bring down these two socialist states, in addition to the other socialist states, DPRK and China. I don't know what they're doing in Laos. Maybe I should research that more. But anyway, there's color revolutions going on in Cuba and Vietnam, and the narratives enabling them have been getting promoted by the most committed of these left-wing anti-Stalinists. For instance, this week, the World Socialist website, the publication of the hardline anti-Stalinist Trotskyist party, the Socialist Equality Party, recommended that the Cuban working class take things into their own hands, as if Cuba isn't already a workers' democracy, and learn about the supposed failures of Castroism. And this is a very suspect, misleading thing for them to write, because Castroism, from what I understand, it's not like Castroism is even a thing. It's just Marxism-Leninism, regular Marxism-Leninism as it's been applied to Cuba. These counter-revolutionaries have applied this label associated with this one man to the Cuban Revolution as a whole, in order to try to delegitimize it and to paint Castro as some evil corrupter of the revolution. So this is pretty opportunistic of them, using these imperialist incited protests in Cuba to promote their flawed Trotskyist theory. But it's been even worse when it's come to the anarchists who've been weighing in on these kinds of things, specifically this one columnist in the anarchist publication Libcom, who a few months ago, writing about the recent protests in Vietnam, that I think this protest movement is still relevant because the Vietnamese communist Luna Oi recently made a video about them, exposing how the protests are getting co-opted by imperialism. And this anarchist columnist, basically their argument was that anybody who has decried the involvement of US aid inside Vietnamese politics is a queerphobe, because these protests are centered around rights for the LGBT community. And as Luna Oi has described, this is actually a totally valid struggle that's taking place there. Apparently, the Vietnamese government has failed to legalize gay marriage and to make it sufficiently easy for transgender people to get institutional recognition for their identities. But as Luna Oi has argued, the United States is cynically exploiting this legitimate struggle that should really only be the business of people within Vietnam. And these anarchists are making apologetics for US co-optation efforts there. And what's really ironic is that Luna Oi emphasizes in her analysis that she herself is bisexual. So it's totally dishonest for people like this anarchist to argue that anybody talking about color revolution tactics in Vietnam is a queerphobe. These are the kinds of dishonest rhetorical tactics that these people use to try to silence a discussion about these counter-revolutionary subversion efforts. And it's really disgusting.
It really is. And they will use any trick. They're looking for any divisions, they, the imperialists, led by the American empire. they will use any trick that they can to try to sow divisions, to sow hatreds. I mean, look what they did in Yugoslavia. Starting in 1983, they sent the CIA in. The CIA would do a hit, murder somebody. That somebody might be a Bosnian Muslim person. And then they'd run around the neighborhood with their little minions, their little CIA agents that they had hired to do this operation. And they'd spread the rumor that all the Serbians who religiously, if they're religious, most of them weren't, most of them were good communists at that back then, but they would spread the lie that the Serbians hated Bosnians and hated Muslims and that they were out to kill all the Muslims. Well, that spreads an enormous amount of fear. That, unfortunately, in Yugoslavia was an extremely effective tactic. Since then, they've come up with their color revolutions, which have in the past also been effective in a few cases, not so much in Syria as an example of one failed color revolution where they tried to bring down the socialist Ba'ath government of Bashir al-Assad in Syria. Yeah, so the fact that they're continuing to attempt to do this in Cuba with really pathetic results. I mean, I've seen the pictures, you know, the communist demonstrations that have come out since last Sunday in Cuba have been tremendous. I mean, tens, hundreds of thousands of people probably. I can't only judge by the pictures, but the pictures show tens and tens and tens of thousands of people, whereas the pictures of the counter-revolutionary terrorists who are protesting in Cuba that you see on MSNBC and CNN and Fox News and in the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, they show hundreds of these counter-revolutionary terrorists at most. So you can see that Washington's most recent attempt at color revolution is failing miserably. The Cuban people aren't buying it. Americans are buying it only because Americans typically are not seeing the counter protests, the protests against the terrorists, against the Washington sponsored anti-communist terrorists in Cuba. All Americans are seeing is the pictures of those terrorists, and you know they're saying oh, they're peaceful demonstrators. Well, we know from the past these are not going to be peaceful demonstrators. They will do whatever they can to sow havoc, to sow chaos, to murder and pillage and destroy. We've seen it over and over again. We saw it in Hong Kong last year. We've seen it over and over again whenever Washington is up to its dirty tricks. So, yeah, absolutely, Rainer. Absolutely. Anything else on that?
No.
It's a very timely article. Hope people will read it. We'll have links to that and many other great resources in the description below this video. Next on the list, not unifying. Oh, we already did that. So get my head on straight. Washington's ever-expanding global mercenary death squads, July 12th, 2021, Rainer Shea.
There's this reality about Afghanistan that the headlines are not telling you, which is Biden is keeping intelligence operatives, special operations forces, and most of all, private mercenaries within Afghanistan. Actually, he's privatizing the war by replacing the official troops with private mercenary contractors, continuing a decades-long trend of privatizing America's wars. This is pretty common for dying empires. And Trump's decision last year to pardon the Blackwater contractors who had been convicted of massacring defenseless Iraqi civilians in Fallujah, I think it was, is an ominous sign, to say the least, because this has created an environment of unprecedented impunity for these mercenary contractors to commit horrific war crimes as they go about in places like Afghanistan. And what's most ominous, I think, is the fact that over these last 20 years, even without so much of a presence of private contractors, the official US forces have themselves committed unspeakable atrocities against ordinary people within Afghanistan based on spurious accusations of collaborating with the Taliban. As Abby Martin exposed this last week in a video, the CIA's death squads, with the full knowledge and direction of the CIA itself, have done things like execute entire families, burn houses down with children inside of them, carry out unspeakable acts with total impunity based on clearly insufficient investigations about these civilians supposedly aiding the Taliban. It's clear that this is not counterterrorism, this is terrorism. The goal of the US occupier is not to track down, per se, the people who have been known to collaborate with the Taliban. Not like those people deserve these kinds of treatments themselves. It's to create an atmosphere of fear within these places that they're trying to hold control over, and to make everybody too afraid to aid the Taliban, to resist the United States. Well, you please be quiet, please, or quieter.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is the reaction from an empire that has been unable to hold solid control over Afghanistan throughout its 20-year project of occupation. And that's been pretty consistently losing to the Taliban, ironically, because of these kinds of atrocities and because of the huge corruption, election fraud, bribery that the CIA has perpetrated within Afghanistan. The locals within these places have been aiding the Taliban precisely because it's their only alternative to this campaign of terrorism that Washington is carrying out against their communities. And there are parallels to this in places like Colombia and Haiti, where the U.S. empire is proliferating private mercenaries, whether to carry out terror against the local populations to stave off revolution, or to export mercenary labor towards U.S. wars like the ones in Yemen and Afghanistan. And what's so alarming about Biden's privatization of the Afghanistan war is that it's really a combination of two factors that have been allowing U.S. forces, or U.S. backed forces, to act with impunity. Firstly, Trump has pardoned these Blackwater contractors, which has created a precedent for future mercenaries to massacre civilians without consequence. And secondly, this comes at the tail end of 2 decades, actually a far longer campaign than that, of CIA death squads that have already been killing innocent people, including children, with total impunity. So add mercenaries onto that, and Afghanistan is in for some horrific times.
Yeah, very, very important article, very timely. And it's important that people know about this. It's important that people begin to know about the MO of organizations like the CIA, which is and has always been since 1947 when it was created, one of the major instruments of American imperialism, one of the major instruments, how they surreptitiously and stealthily and secretly outside of their area of impact, how they secretly impose their will on more than 100, probably about 130 is my estimate, different countries in the world today that really make up the American empire, between countries that are oppressed in this kind of fashion, oppressed with economic methods, oppressed with political methods, oppressed by simply buying off their politicians, which they do. They have many tricks up their sleeve, but their empire is large and broad, and they use some pretty nasty fascistic tactics. Good points, Rainer, and that is the kind of crime against humanity that we that we in the left, that we in the anti-war movement, that we in the Marxist-Leninist left are fighting against, and will continue and need to continue and need to step up the fight against. We need to bring this empire down. We need to bring an end to the capitalist ruling class that wields this evil instrument around the world. We need to bring to an end the capitalist state centered in Washington, D.C., that enables it. And we need to bring to an end the entire capitalist class, to eliminate it. Now, if for anyone who's jumping to conclusions, I'm not talking about going out and murdering every capitalist that exists. No, I'm talking about collectively we need to disassemble and put into the dustbin of history the capitalist class that does all this evil, the capitalist class that buys our own government, supposedly our own government, which has never really been our own government. That is the task ahead. And if we don't, this same empire is leading humanity to disaster. It's leading towards an ultimate wiping out of humanity because of the climate crisis that they have created, the global warming, the warming of the planet that we have actually witnessed, and that scientific surveys have quantified, and because of the threat of nuclear war, which is the worst in history right now, according to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And the most dire right now, more so than the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis, this empire, this evil empire, the American empire, the largest, most brutal empire in history, it really is leading us all towards our doom, as the atomic scientists point out, and with their doomsday clock. It's really, they are leading us towards doom. They're playing brinksmanship with other large nuclear nations like Russia, the Russian Federation, and like the PRC, the People's Republic of China, and pushing these people, goading, poking the bear in Russia, poking the dragon in China. And at some point, they're going to cross a red line, because believe me, the people of Russia, the people of China, they have red lines too. They're patriotic people too. They're people who will defend their own countries and will use their nuclear deterrent to warn off the evil empire, the American empire. So we are really, really, we're headed for disaster unless we can figure out a way. And that's the wonderful thing. Marxism-Leninism has figured out a way to bring this evil empire down, and has in the past brought evil empires down, and has been successful at replacing them with socialist, democratic people's states that represent the people, that are run by the working class, the peasantry, the working folks of other countries. They've done that. They did that in Russia in 1917. They did that in China in 1949. They did it in Cuba in 1959. Since then, they've done it in other places. They did it in Nicaragua in 1979. They did it in El Salvador in the late 70s. They did it in North Korea and Laos and Vietnam. In Vietnam, they were up against the entire might of the evil American empire, and yet they beat them back, not without huge cost. If you watch Luna Oy, what she just mentioned a little while ago, she does a stupendous job of showing us a part of the huge damage that these imperialists did to Vietnam when they were attempting to they did invade, but when they were attempting to overcome the Vietnamese people. The Vietnamese people, they've got to go down in history as some of the most valiant, courageous, incredibly tenacious people ever. And they beat back Washington. They beat back the evil American empire. So yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next subject, which is U.S. empire stokes Uyghur terror in Afghanistan with an eye on China. July 11th. Also, Rainer Shea. Rainer Shea is our spokesman of the day. Go ahead, Rainer. Sorry.
In this last year, something odd has been happening in Afghanistan. First, the Trump administration decided to take the East Turkestan Islamic movement off of the U.S. terrorist watch list because there was supposedly a lack of evidence that it's a terrorist group. And then since then, the ETIM, this Uyghur terrorist organization, it's obviously a terrorist organization, has been undergoing a great rise in its manpower, in its financial resources, in its logistical resources, in its weaponry. I have yet to see direct evidence that the United States is funding it, but I wouldn't be surprised because something exactly like this happened in the 1980s in the previous Cold War, where the United States funded the group that would go on to do 9/11 in order to counter the Soviets. So let's see where we'll be 20, 30 years from now. So this Uyghur terrorist group is clearly being aided by the United States, if not in direct providing of weaponry and funding, at least in terms of narrative, because the United States has clearly been enabling the rise of this group simply by refusing to recognize it as a terrorist group and to fight against it. So there's this rise of this Uyghur terrorist group that is really reflective of a statement from former Army Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson from a few years ago, who speculated that the United States is going to use Afghanistan as a launching pad for inciting the Uyghur separatist movement and for trying to destabilize China. Clearly what's going on is an attempt to revitalize the terror campaign within Xinjiang that was successful for decades, but in these last several years has failed to produce any new terrorist attacks within Xinjiang because of China's de-radicalization program. The United States does not like this. Every day, the CIA is hoping that its agitation propaganda about a supposed Uyghur genocide and its aiding of this Uyghur terrorist group are going to produce a tipping point that reintroduces the tragedies that used to regularly occur within northwestern China. And that's a scary prospect. Let's see how it goes, because China has been acknowledging that the East Turkestan Islamic movement is posing an increasingly serious threat to Chinese national security. And I don't know how it's going to go, how successful the imperialists are going to be. Is China going to have to militarize the border with Afghanistan? Is China going to need to intervene within Afghanistan? Where is it going to go?
Good questions. Yeah, it strikes me too. From China, I mean, the China's new Silk Road, China, what's been called the Belt and Road Initiative, Belt and Road Project. The jumping off point from China into the rest of the world is Xinjiang. And the American empire has done a lot already. They've tried to disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. What is the Belt and Road Initiative? We should say that for those who aren't familiar with it, but it's a massive infrastructure project, the largest in history, 20 times larger than the Marshall Plan after World War II, aimed at extending railroads, roads, pipelines, sea lanes, to throughout Eurasia, throughout Africa, and over into South America and Central America. And they would like to extend it even, through Russia, across the Bering Strait into America, if America would cooperate. But of course, America will not the current kind of incredibly fascist and imperialist America of today. But it is a phenomenal project. And think about the havoc that it would cause if the CIA were able to engineer terrorist acts, terrorist attacks on Belt and Road building projects in Xinjiang, and along the route, because it's the supply chain that will go both ways, but will feed into the Belt and Road corridors, are coming from all throughout China. So I'm sure their ultimate goal is to engineer attacks on critical junctures in those in the supply belt, the supply chain, by attacking the infrastructure. So that's one concern. The other concern, of course, is that the CIA in the past has used Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and offshoots of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, affiliates of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, in Xinjiang province, with the aim of fostering this terrorism, and with the aim of recruiting young Muslims from that area, Uyghurs, in that in that province, and taking them off into their wars against Syria, against Libya, against Iraq, and against Afghanistan, their wars against Russia, against the Russian Federation. Yeah, these are the plans. Hopefully, they will be squashed and smashed. I have great confidence in the People's Republic of China and in the Chinese, the Communist Party of China, in their leadership, in being ever vigilant, in being the best there are in the entire world at self-defense, at the defense of their nation. And I have confidence in the Chinese people, something like 90% of whom support the Communist Party of China. I have confidence that they will beat back this tiny number, and that's all the CIA can really accomplish, a tiny number. They will be able to beat back, just as they have in the past, when the CIA threw these terrorists at them a decade or so ago. They will be able to beat this back. It would be so much nicer if they didn't have to. And that's what's up to us. Ultimately, we, the American people, need to rise up against this kind of blatant war crimes and crimes against humanity in our names. There's a great organization called Not in Our Name, Not in Our Names. And I think that's a great sentiment, not in our names. We must not allow this to be done in our names. And we must realize that this is being done in our names. So under these circumstances, the situation is such that it's really up to us, we the American people, and especially it's up to us, the Marxist-Leninists in America, to help the American people come to this realization, to help the American people get the information that they need to come to these conclusions, which they are not getting from the mass media, from the billionaire-owned mass media, which they are not getting from the American government, of course. Why would the American government foster that kind of knowledge? So anyway, let's see. Next on the list here is manufactured destabilization, the US empire's desperate tactic, July 10th, 2021. Rainer Shea, take it away.
You might notice a theme with this week's batch of articles. It's all in some way seemingly tied into Afghanistan, aside from the Cuba and Vietnam parts. Because in Afghanistan, one of the reasons why the US empire is aiming to perpetuate this presence of mercenaries, intelligence operatives, special forces is to keep Afghanistan unstable, because the US empire, if it can't make its Uyghur separatist terrorism spill over back into Xinjiang again, the least it can do is delay the progress towards a fully multipolar world by keeping Afghanistan unstable without a reliable state structure, and keeping China, therefore, from extending its Belt and Road Initiative sufficiently into the country. And that's really a disturbing thought when you picture the practical realities on the ground that are going to be unfolding in these next years and decades potentially. Because like I said, the CIA already has a thorough network of death squads that regularly commit war crimes against Afghanis, including Afghan children. And it seems like these intelligence operatives are going to work with this rising presence of mercenaries to kill random people, torch up random people, so that they can keep Afghanistan unstable and keep China from giving Afghanistan the infrastructure that it needs to survive after 20 years of war. This is really a despicable project that they're carrying out, and they're trying to carry it out right under our noses as Biden and his media enablers claim that the Afghanistan war is ending. The Afghanistan war is not ending. They intend for it to continue for decades, and they intend for it to keep making Afghanistan's living standards get driven down, just so that they can stop China from scoring another geopolitical point against Washington. This is what they see as the cost of holding China's rise at bay. And it's clear that they're pursuing a similar project in Haiti, where, as we discussed last week, the president has recently been assassinated, and now the US empire is trying to take advantage of this to move forward with another series of interventions within Haiti. I don't know where this is going to go, but that seems to be where Biden is leaning. And what's interesting is that Colombian mercenaries have been accused of carrying out this assassination of the dictatorial former president of Haiti. If this is the case, it's clear that Washington has gotten its mercenary proxies in Colombia to assassinate a leader who, even though he served neocolonial interests, it's clear that he was very unpopular and was therefore an inconvenience to the U.S. empire. So now it's possible they've just killed him off so that they can have an excuse to intervene amid gathering further unrest within the country. So that this might be another case of the U.S. manufacturing destabilization within a country for the sake of stopping the rise of revolutionary movements. These are the kinds of tactics that the U.S. empire is increasingly going to be carrying out around the world. The tactic that they used in Libya 10 years ago of totally destabilizing a country just for the sake of scoring a point against the forces of anti-imperialist revolution. It's not like they ever intended for Afghanistan or Libya to have cohesive, stable states after the U.S. interventions, because bringing stability and humanitarianism to a country is obviously not the first priority of the U.S. empire. The U.S. empire's first priority is to counter its rival superpowers and to overthrow anti-imperialist governments like the government of Gaddafi in Libya. Obama may have admitted that it was the worst failure of his presidency to not be able to create a stable new state for Libya, but in basic terms, he very much fulfilled his purpose, which was to destroy another government that had been defying the U.S. empire.